Okay, welcome to the Making Your Cycle Your Superpower workshop, which is exciting. Well, workshop slash masterclass. So we are going to be looking at how actually you can kind of flip the script when it comes to your period. Generally, we kind of get told, or we live in a culture where your period is like, ugh, I have my period. Ugh, this is really bad. This is really annoying. I wish I didn't have it. Blah, blah, blah. All of that sort of stuff. And so we're going to look at flipping the script on that, as well as addressing some of the negative aspects that obviously can make you feel like it's the worst thing ever and that it's like this terrible curse on the female kind, which I think for some women it can completely feel like that because it's not a very fun experience. So if this is your first time at a masterclass, feel free to mute yourself. You should see on the bottom of here, you have a little set of instructions so you can mute yourself. You can also unmute yourself. So if you have a question, you can talk to me, which is really nice. It's also always really fun. And these masterclasses tend to be a bit of a blend of sometimes they are a lot of interaction and then other times there's more kind of more teaching-y, if that makes sense. And so tonight will probably be a little bit more on the teaching end. I've got 3 different kind of sections to go through, which are, I'll just try and find it on my notes. We're basically going to go through, sorry, I'm just bringing up my notes so I don't tell you things that are wrong. We're going to go through getting to know your cycle first. So I'm just going to go through a little bit of what kind of is actually happening. So there's kind of 4 phases in what would be a sort of typical menstrual cycle. What's going on there, so we know what's happening, because if you can't leverage what you don't know about. So we'll do that quite quickly, just a little bit of period education, because it wasn't actually something I knew about until I started doing what I'm doing, if that makes sense. I just thought it was all about like estrogen, maybe. You know, those estrogen's got something to do with it. That was kind of the extent of my my insight. And estrogen does obviously have something to do with it, but there's a whole lot of other things going on as well. And then we're going to look at something called cycle syncing, which isn't something I've invented. There's a functional medicine doctor called Alyssa Vitti. Pretty sure that is her name. Anyway, it comes up on the thing that's basically put this terminology together of cycle syncing. I think it's really, really helpful and powerful, where we look at leveraging each of those 4 different phases of a standard cycle, of how can we really leverage those. And we'll also talk about how you can do that, say if your cycle isn't necessarily typical length, or if maybe you are hitting like kind of more menopause time, and there's, you know, the regularity can shift. And also a little bit of, say, if you feel like your menstrual cycle has ceased, how you can still sort of utilize that sense of cyclical living, which as women we are constantly in a process of, just because of how that's our bodies work, and a lot of how the planet works as well, like seasons and cycles and moons, and there's this nice kind of circle of life. And it rules us all. I'm going to start singing Lion King. I'll stop now before you all leave the call. But you know, think Lion King, circle of life. Although we're not gonna get that deep. And then we're gonna look at certain things that are really important when it comes to balancing your hormones. So yeah, we're gonna address. You might be like, well, yeah, it's all nice. It's all well and good being like, your periods should be this lovely experience that you leverage, and yeah, your periods can be a superpower. But also the reality is they can be really painful, really sore, come with some horrible symptoms, or make you turn into some sort of like crazy She-Hulk for a couple of days, where you're like, who am I? What has happened to Kezia, and who has taken over me for these several days before you can get your period? So we're also going to look a little bit at that. So that's a general thing. So throughout this workshop, if you are joining live and you're not watching the recording of the masterclass, then feel free to you can either use the chat box if you'd rather just chat any questions that you have, or obviously just feel free to unmute yourself and interrupt me. You're very welcome to do that. I don't mind at all. It's kind of what these things are for. So let's get started. And then also, if you have any questions as we go on, or you have any questions that you want me to cover, then do let me know. I know I've collected a few from the Facebook group from people that can't be here, because I know some people are back at school and back at work, and other people are still off on summer jollies. I always get very confused because of the whole Scotland, England school holiday confusion. Okay, so I'm just going to bring up a simple image to talk us through. Just seeing. Is that? Yes, I assume that you can see that. I've basically just brought up a little image with squiggly lines on it. That's basically what you should be looking at as we speak. So what I'm going to do first is just a really quick kind of what is going on, like what is our menstrual cycle, what's going on, what's happening with our hormones, so that we can actually know more about potentially what we need to fix, if that makes sense, and some of the different things that are going on, and potentially why you might feel the way that you feel, why you might have certain symptoms at certain times of the month and why you might not. And then before we then look into how we can kind of really buffer those or actually make the most of those, because there is a real shift in women, regardless of, even if you don't have a standard cycle, even if your cycle is sporadic, short, whatever it is, women very much live on the cyclical hormonal basis, and that does change. That does mean our biochemical rhythm is constantly changing, and a lot of the time we can think that that's a negative thing, and society has definitely told women it's a negative thing. In the past, women couldn't. I was watching Graham Norton last night, and it had that boxer who won a gold medal at Rio Olympics, and so she was this female boxer, and women could only start boxing in something like the 80s because it was thought they were too unstable during their periods to partake in boxing. So there is a slight old school society thing of a negativity actually around this cyclical living that we live on, and this kind of shift in our biochemistry. And for sure it can have a really negative impact on people. It's not to dismiss that, but actually you can actually shift that, you can reframe that and shift that script, and actually really think about, okay, well, where can I use these biochemical shifts and them to actually be kind of my superpowers, and actually something I can really utilize in my day-to-day life and habits and rituals and all of these kinds of things. So first of all, this is basically what's in front of us is your atypical standard menstrual cycle. So if your cycle is generally shorter, if it's irregular, if it's longer, if you've got like a 40-day cycle, or if it's just all over the place, it still kind of fits. It can still fit in within this framework, but you can ignore the days at the bottom, if that makes sense, because you might not have the perfect 28-day cycle. Before getting pregnant, I traditionally, years and years ago, I used to have very sporadic cycles. They would just show up, and I'd get loads in a row really close together, and then they'd disappear for 6 months, and then they'd show up, and then they'd disappear, and then they were all over the place. And then more recently, in the last probably 4 or 5 years, actually a very short cycle. At one point it was 18-day cycle, so I was basically having a period every two weeks-ish, just over 2 weeks, which was interesting. And so, but every woman is slightly different. Your average cycle length is, ideally you want it to be around 26 days to maybe 34, but obviously if you're kind of reaching sort of peri or pre-menopause time, that might become a little bit shakier. Or if you are kind of postpartum and you're maybe getting your first period, like I know Sarah posted in the group, getting her first period, then again that can take a little bit of re-rhythming. If you're coming off kind of hormonal contraceptives, it can take up to a year to 18 months for your cycle to, say you've been on the pill for 8 years or something, it can take 12-18 months for, again, your hormones to regulate and your cycle to kind of regulate down. And obviously with things like PCOS and endometriosis, and thyroid issues, they can all affect it. Anyway, so what is going on? What is this cycle that we are on? So the start of this, in front of you, the picture you see, basically is a lot of relatively flat line, and that would be day 1. So that would be the day that you have the bleeding part of your period. That starts this that marks the beginning of your cycle. Like as soon as you start to bleed, that's day one. And often during that bleeding part of your cycle, which would be like the menstrual phase, because would be when the actual bleeding is taking place. There's 4 main hormones we're going to talk about. They aren't the only hormones involved. In your cycle, there are actually other hormones, but for sake of simplicity, these are the 4 main players really that are happening, and they're progesterone, they're good old estrogen, they're your luteinizing hormones, and they're your follicle stimulating hormone. So your progesterone and your estrogen all generally are made more locally to your kind of reproductive organs, and your things like luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormones, I'm pretty sure, are primarily signaled off by the brain. They kind of the brain will send the signal, make the hormone, send the hormone down to kind of get stuff started. On a very simple level, there's other organs involved and other things going on. So when you begin your period, everything's slightly flatline, which is often why people don't feel great, because you can see from the rest of the picture, there's like, woo, it's like it's all peaks and troughs and movements, and then like start the period, you're like, so, which is why a lot of women don't, the first couple of days of their bleeding, they're not feeling like on top of the world, because they've had these lovely peaks of estrogen and peaks of estrogen, and they've had all this activity, and they've had ovulation, and then everything kind of flatlines, and that's your sort of menstrual phase. But what you can see is that towards the end of your menstrual phase, probably around like day 5, day 6-ish, you'll start to see a slow increase, which is the orange line of your estrogen. And estrogen is really that peak. You'll see that estrogen slowly peaks, and that peak is really, really important for basically triggering off ovulation. That's what happened. And estrogen is often the hormone that will start to get energized. So in a normal cycle, you might have your period, the bleeding part of your cycle, and then actually normally around like day 10 days after, 12 days after, 14 days after, that's when you might start to feel a little bit more like, woo, you might really feel like you can get a lot of stuff done. You've got some energy. You might see like an increase in your libido. You might suddenly want to be sociable a little bit more, like you kind of emerge. Some people call the bleeding part of your cycle your winter time, in that it's that kind of wintry sort of just stay inside, be slightly antisocial. I can see Carolyn laughing. She's like, yes. So that can sometimes, it's a nice way of thinking about it metaphorically, as like a winter phase of your cycle. And then actually when you get into ovulation, so you would then have this kind of ovulatory phase, then which is kind of the middle part of your cycle, that's often like summer sort of time, although we've missed out spring, which is this spring is basically this slow peak of estrogen, and that would be your follicular phase. So you can see it's not as much happens with your follicle stimulating hormone, but you can see that does peak slightly, and that actually triggers off the maturing process of your eggs. So we're all born with the eggs that we will have for our lives, but one of the points and purposes of our menstrual cycle is the maturing of these eggs, and the kind of ripening of them for them to then be at a mature level, kind of creating a good quality egg for it then to be released from the ovaries, grabbed by this kind of follicle thing, and then put into what would be into your tubes. I know that's probably a butchered explanation of the anatomy, but it's generally that idea. And that's your follicular phase, and that's your spring. So that's kind of, you're starting to emerge out of that winter time. Your energy slowly increasing, your libido might be slowly increasing, might not, but it's that kind of rise in estrogen going on in your body. It's also during this time that if you were to take your temperature, you might notice that your temperature slowly is potentially increasing. and then you hit the middle of what would be of your period, which, and a classic quote unquote normal atypical cycle would be around day 14 ish. 13, 14, you would then hit your ovulatory phase, which would be your summer. So summer is all like, woo, summertime, energy, going out, lots of light. If you think about the energy around summer, that's kind of some of the energy that would be encapsulated around your ovulation time. It's often when people feel a little bit more sociable. They feel just like it's at that time, you know, when you have outfits that you wear at certain times of the month and you're like, I look great in this outfit. It looks so good. Got my rockin' body. You're just like, yes. And then you can wear that exact same outfit at a different time of the month and you're like, I look like a Teletubby. Like, I look like a Teletubby. This is, I cannot believe I've worn this outfit before. I look terrible. But, you know, and it's like the outfit has not changed. You're literally wearing the exact same combination of like lipstick, shoes, dress, jeans, whatever it is. But you look in the mirror and are like, this is terrible. And that's a nice depiction of, you know, the actual things in front of you. Your actual outfit has not shifted. You are still fitting into it. It's not like it doesn't fit you anymore, but it's that you've maybe, if you put that outfit on in kind of a winter phase of your cycle, or then you could potentially be feeling like a Teletubby. Whereas if you put that on in your ovulatory phase or your springtime phase, you're going to be like, woo, yeah, rocking this look. Or there's certain clothes you might just not want to wear at certain times of the month because they're too, I don't know, they're too like bright, and you maybe wear black. You know, everyone has very different responses to that. But as soon as you start to become aware of them, you can start to kind of slightly like gently track, if that makes sense, whereabouts in your cycle that you are, from kind of how you feel and what you want to wear. I know for me, it was really helpful learning this aspect because I always regularly had a couple of days, probably 2 days, 48 hours, where I just felt like I had no friends. And this was like a regular, I would regularly feel like, oh, I just have no friends. Everyone else is out like having plans and being cool and having fun, you know, and I was like, oh, I'm so alone. And I logically knew I wasn't. Like I could literally write, like this is how much I love lists. So when I would feel like that, I'd literally like be like, no, this is illogical. I'm going to write a list of all my friends. And so I'd have little lists on my phone of like literally all the names of my friends just to like gather evidence to be like, Kezzy, you do have friends. This is ridiculous. But it was it was a constant thing until I started to do this kind of cycle syncing, which we're going to talk about, when I could literally predict the 2 days in my cycle where I was going to feel like a loner. So I just knew if I had that in my diary, I knew I'm going to book in a phone call with my best friend. I'm going to meet someone for coffee, or even just a pop-up reminder in my phone, which was like, I think I literally put like feeling like a loner ? In my diary, just so I knew that it wasn't me. It was just part of my biochemistry, and that was fine. So there is, once you can, that's why I think I call this kind of getting to like it becoming your superpower, because it's really just a deep awareness of how your biochemistry is affecting your emotions. And so then you can make more powerful choices about things like from scheduling to practical things to also how you deal with those emotions, so that you don't feel like you're out of control or powerless around them. So then anyway, so you have your summer phase, which is this nice ovulatory phase. This is obviously the time that you can get pregnant and you would be fertile, because you've got like a nice little egg sort of waiting, being like, fertilize me. And that's what all your hormones are ready for, going for there. And then towards the end of your cycle, you'd have what would be the luteal phase, sorry. Because you've had this peak after your peak in estrogen, you then get a peak in your luteinizing hormone, and so after that you then come into this luteal phase, and that would be more like your autumn. So your energy often is dropping slightly. You are starting to enter that kind of, autumny, well, I'm not as sociable, kind of want nice warming foods. I want kind of comforty foods. You're not feeling like all super excited about going for a run at 6 o'clock in the morning as much. It's that autumny vibe, which is, again, quite a nice way of thinking about it in terms of kind of a metaphorical aspect. But during that phase, what really should be happening is your estrogen drops slightly, and then it should peak again. But this is the time when your progesterone should be really, really peaking, because the body is thinking and hoping on a primal level that that an embryo has been formed, that conception has taken place, and progesterone basically helps to thicken the lining of your uterus for then this hopeful embryo. The body's always hopeful. We're going to procreate all the time. The body's always like, this month. It's like a little dog. It's just like, baby. I mean, it's obviously completely your choice. Some of you might be in stages in life where you're like, no way. And others, you may not want kids, but on a biochemical level, your body is like, baby, all the time, which I just find funny. And so this is a really important phase. You want really good peaks of estrogen to really help thicken the lining of your uterus. You do have still a peak of estrogen as well to help with that. You'll see a drop in your luteinizing hormone, a flat line of your follicular stimulating hormone, because the egg's matured, it's been ovulated, it's been released, it's hopefully been fertilized, and the luteinizing hormone helps to trigger your progesterone, and it should peak on that. And the biggest problem, often what people find, why people can feel so low prior to their period, is sometimes this drop in estrogen, but also more often than that, it's because people are not necessarily getting this really lovely peak of progesterone. So it's not, there may be, instead of getting a nice like woo and down, they're kind of getting they're getting like a little blip on the radar. Or potentially their body actually has way too much estrogen in it due to detoxification issues and maybe some toxicity. So actually the estrogen kind of overrides the progesterone and can cause a lot of problems. During this particular phase, you want more progesterone than estrogen during this part of your cycle. And if that gets flipped around, that's not a great thing. Even though prior, in the sort of spring, summertime, that increase of estrogen is what is so lovely. But if that continues during this particular phase, then that can cause a lot of problems. So if a lot of women find that they get really angry, really sad, really depressed, really anxious, if during this kind of just before their period, so this luteal phase, this autumn phase, this you're not bleeding yet, but it's probably the week to 10 days before you do, if you things like breast tenderness, or some people might have spotting, like little bits of blood, not quite a period, or mood, low moods, depression, all of these spots breaking out sometimes, that can sometimes be because these little peaks of progesterone and peaks of estrogen are not doing what they're meant to. There's an imbalance. You've either got too much estrogen that's kind of overriding the progesterone, or you've maybe just not got enough progesterone happening, and so you're not getting that lovely peak. And progesterone is a really, really important hormone for the brain. We often think about progesterone from a kind of sex hormone perspective, but actually they use progesterone as a lot of treatment for like traumatic brain injury, because it's a really calming, soothing hormone for your brain function, which is why then that would therefore make sense if women feel like they turn into like the Hulk or Frankenstein before they get their period. It can be potentially that their progesterone isn't as high as it should be, or it's being overridden by an imbalance of other hormones. So those are kind of roughly your 4 phases. And so the easiest way to think about them is in terms of the seasons. So you have the start of the bleeding part is where the cycle starts. That would be winter. You have this kind of spring phase is when your kind of period is slowly ending, and you're slowly getting a bit more energy. You're kind of emerging from that kind of bleeding part. Then you have the summertime, which is all like ovulation, impregnate me, woo, sort of time. And then you have that autumn aspect, which is just before you would head into the winter, the bleeding part of your cycle. And that's where you should get that spike of progesterone. But that often for women, that can be a time of where they see a shift in their mood and other symptoms. And that can really, that particular phase can really highlight certain potential imbalances or going on in the body, because there's a specific ratio that the body likes to have. And so you can think about it in terms of seasons. It's probably the easiest way to think about it. Or your actual names of them. You'd have your menstrual phase, which is your bleeding part. You'd have your follicular phase, because you have your follicle stimulating hormone helping mature the egg. Your ovulation phase, the release of the egg, that's when you would be you'd have your sort of roughly 5-day window of actually being fertile to make a baby. And then you'd have your luteal phase, which is your kind of pre-period phase, and that's really where the body is hoping for a fertilized egg so it can implant it into the uterus lining and then start to grow a baby, and then blah blah blah. Or if an egg doesn't get fertilized, then that's when the lining of the uterus will shed, and then therefore you start your period. Then you're back at the beginning of your menstrual phase, or the winter time of it. So all that a period is you don't have a fertilized egg, so there's nothing getting planted into the uterus lining, so the body sheds that blood and starts the process again of maturing an egg, hoping that next time there'll be a baby, and let's make a fresh coat of blood to make it all healthy and happy and all of that sort of stuff. So that's a really basic explanation of the main hormonal key players that are happening in your period, what roughly is happening, like what's peaking and what's troughing. I don't think troughing is a word, or it sounds like a rude word if it is. What's peaking and what's not peaking during your cycle with the actual hormones, and then an introduction to these kind of different phases. And so you can use whatever language you find helpful, metaphorical kind of season phases, and which is quite helpful in terms of cycles, or the more kind of technically accurate terms, but they're a bit more. Follicular phase is a bit more of a mouthful, I always think, to say. So that's a little bit about what it is and just getting to know your cycle. So if you have any questions about that, do let me know. Otherwise, I'm going to bring up another image that is more to do with this thing called cycle syncing, which is then looking at, okay, if this is roughly the biochemistry of this part of my period, how do I make the most of it? Like, how can I leverage things? And B, how can I be kind to myself as well? So it's kind of comes from two different perspectives. It's not just about like, how can I do more and be more and whatever. It's also about how can I leverage things? When's the best time to do something, and when's maybe not the best time to do something? So I'm just going to bring up, I'll show you an app that I use as well, which is really helpful for this. So let me know any questions. Otherwise, I'm going to bring up, this is just a quick summary of, so am I sharing? I think I'm showing the wrong image again, aren't I? Oh. There we go. So you should be seeing an image that says cycle syncing on it, with a kind of pink image. So when it comes to cycle syncing, they all go within these different phases. So this particular image, if this comes from, I want to make sure I get the lady's name right. Yeah, Alyssa Vitti. So this isn't something I've come up with. It's something I've stolen from somebody else, and she's a great kind of functional medicine doctor. So she's like she has an integrative approach. She works a lot with women around hormones, and it's probably the best, most data-driven, cyclical, kind of kind, honoring way of structuring this information that I've come across. Because a lot of the time, a lot of information that's out there about the periods are often about people getting pregnant, and that's rare. Like, that's not everyone's aim. For the majority of the time we have the periods, we're not trying to get pregnant most of the time. You know, we might have a period of time when we are, but then the rest of our lives we're potentially actively not trying to make a baby, unless you're one of those amazing people. Like, I have a few friends that I'm pretty sure will just have babies until no more, like until they just don't, their bodies don't have babies anymore. They just love it so much. But most of us have, majority of our actual period time is not looking around getting pregnant. And so this is a really nice way of bringing together lots of information and lots of different ways of leveraging it. So in terms of the different phases, so we have, we'll start at that kind of menstrual phase with it. And so what we're talking about, what we've seen before with the menstrual phase, is that there's kind of a bit of a flat line of your energy. That's kind of sort of like D. It's not completely flat line, but it's a little bit like D. And so this is when you'd often have your lowest levels of energy. And therefore it's a really good time to take a little bit of time to rest, actually, and give yourself a little bit of grace for that. Now, obviously, you know, you might just be at work all day and you can't, unfortunately, we don't live in a society where you can be like, I started my period today, I'm just going to take a day of rest. And some people obviously will, because they can be so sick, which is not ideal. But ideally, it is a time when your energy is lowest. And I know you might be like, Kezia, I thought you were going to tell me all the good things about my period, and now you're just telling me I'm going to be really tired. This is rubbish. How is this a superpower? Well, one of the things is around energy, it's not normal as a woman who's living this very cyclical life to have constant levels of anything. Actually, that's part of what we learn from this. And actually, although that might not sound encouraging, it's actually very releasing, because otherwise we can be quite harsh and quite driven with ourselves of like, oh, I feel really tired. I shouldn't feel tired. I don't want to feel tired. I've got too much things to feel tired. I don't want to be tired. I hate being tired, or whatever the thing is. Whereas actually, when you can start to cycle sync, you can start to give yourself real permission to be like, oh, I do actually feel tired. Okay. Oh, this is why. I'm going to give myself permission to be tired, or to whatever it is, you know, the other symptoms that we might talk about. And actually, it's a much kinder place to live your life. Otherwise, you're constantly kind of pushing and potentially constantly driving things forward. Now, it's not to say that there's nothing you can do. You've just got to be tired. You know, there's things you can do to optimize your energy, which we'll talk about in a bit. But it's also about acknowledging just the cycle that you're in, and that's okay. And that part of this sort of cycle syncing is having that holistic approach and kind of giving yourself permission to feel the way that you feel, and not basically trying to force yourself to be like a man's hormonal cycle is 24 hours. They do have a hormonal cycle. It's just very predictable. It stays the same. It's done within 24 hours. And it's just like clockwork, just keeps on. I mean, men can obviously have hormonal imbalances as well. That is common. But that's why, you know, your male friends or male counterpart, you might find that your partner's energy, if they're a man, is relatively consistent levels. I know that with Joe, his energy is just always very consistent and generally always better than mine. And it's just like, yep, you know, and he will get tired if he overdoes it, but there's not this huge fluctuation. And because often just the society that we live in, sometimes it can be really helpful for us to give ourselves permission, and actually that we are different. We do have a cycle, that we do live cyclically. Yes, there's things we can do to buffer and mitigate that, but there is just a biochemical reaction. There is a kind of biochemical consequence, just cause and effect in the body. And depending on your personality, I found that to be a very actually releasing thought to have. So I don't need to keep on feeling like I should fill in the blank. I should do this. I should do, you know, we end up shoulding on ourselves and it gets messy. So that's the kind of more downside, not downside, but it's maybe just a reality of that bleeding part cycle. So I've also got some notes on my phone that I made as well. But also in terms of your focus, like where your brain is at this point, it's a really good time for kind of setting goals. It's a great time for like reading reports, digging into data, being a bit more analytical and looking at things in a more analytical, kind of critical framework. So if you're in a job, say for me, I know that, say with running a business, this is a good time for me to start to be like, okay, what are my next goals for the next 3 months? It's a good time for me to maybe to look at finances and financial reports and to keep updated on some numbers, or to look at our kind of family finances, family budgets, and or to do things like with my masters, to maybe look at that paper that has that really like kind of juicy set of statistical results that I don't generally love reading. Now would be the time that would be good in terms of how my biochemistry is affecting my brain, would be a really good time to do that. In terms of exercise, this is the time where you don't necessarily want to be hitting your personal bests. Say if you lift weights, during this time, you're not actually going to be building that much muscle just because of the way your biochemistry and your hormones set up. So you don't necessarily want to be pushing yourself really, really hard at the gym, because you actually your body is it's not the most leverageable time to do that. There's other times in your cycle where it's a great time to go and lift weights, hit it hard, get really sweaty, because you almost get like double the benefit then of doing it than if you would at this phase, if that makes sense, which is also really nice when it comes to exercise. I know some people like very clear routines, but also again, giving yourself permission at certain times of the month. You really might not want to do what you usually do. You might not want to go to that Zumba class. You might not want to go into that, do weights or go swimming or go to that gym class. Actually, and this phase is a really nice time for doing things like walking, yoga, Pilates, kind of more mindful activities. It's also a really good time. It's quite a draining time in the body. So really focusing on your kind of nutrient dense foods. I think this infographic talks about things like stews, meats. If you think about a bleeding time, there's a loss of iron, there's kind of a loss of nutrients in the blood. So it's really focusing on quite warming. And if you think about the season, so this is like a winter season. So thinking about wintry, warming, in winter time, we tend to eat a little bit more. We might have more stews, warm foods, soups. We're not sitting eating like wheatgrass shots during this time. We might like hot chocolates, all of these kind of more warming type foods, and those are kind of the main sort of things to make the most of. And so in terms of leveraging during this time, what I've done is really made sure that I focus on eating kind of whatever the foods I feel like eating, but with a focus on kind of warming things. This is a great time to introduce things like bone broth, or to add a little bit more bone broth to your stuff, to give yourself a little bit more grace for being tired, but a great time to use your brain in a more critical, analytical, goal setting, bigger picture planning type time. And also a good time to kind of think of it as a bit of a kind of like a fresh start, sort of cleaning the slate clean, getting it sorted, like fresh start type vibe. So that is your menstrual phase. So then you have your follicular phase. So during this time, your hormones are still at a low level, but they're beginning to slowly increase, and your eggs, all with your follicle stimulating hormone to help that egg mature. And so you do start to get a little bit more energy. You're not at the peak of your energy, but your energy is getting a little bit more, that kind of potential brain fog that you may have. And it's actually worth saying with all these things, these are all generalizations. The reason for cycle syncing, these are general pillars. Everyone's cycle is slightly different. So you might be like, Kezia, there's no way I want to do any analytical things on day 2 of my period. No way on earth. That's totally fine. These are general things based on biochemical reactions, but everyone's body is totally different. And the idea of cycle syncing, I want to explain it to you in the general sense, in the broader sense, so that then you can really find, once you become aware and once you start to track, you can then create your own version of this, if that makes sense, where you can be like, actually, this is a really great time to do this. I really rock at this during this time. This is a time not to do this. Like for me, I can't remember what phase of my cycle it was, but when I used to work in like running a coffee shop, I knew there was a phase in my cycle where I'd basically break everything. Like I'd drop cups, drop things, smash things, put paninis on the floor. I was just really clumsy for about 4 or 5 days. So once I started to learn that, I would always be like, no, I really shouldn't be like on any waitressing duties right now. Like, get me like making coffee, and that's fine. So this is really so that I'm giving you a basic building blocks of generalizations, but that hopefully you can fine tune your own kind of reality to this. So if you're like, Kezia, my energy doesn't come back, my energy never comes back, then that's totally fine. But this is generally how a kind of a healthy cycle would work with that. So it's during this kind of, say, spring phase that this is when it's a great time to do creative things. It's a great time to start to look at problem solving, a great time for kind of a creative project. So whether that be in your workplace, tackling something new, looking at a new problem, or maybe you have your own kind of creative craft projects or whatever it is that you do. And now this would be a good time to kind of be working on those a little bit more, and just to get those creative juices flowing. Maybe it's something you like, pictures inside your house you've been meaning to frame for ages and you've never got around to doing, that kind of thing, sorting out your wardrobe, that sort of stuff. And it's a really good time to kind of, again, there's still that thread of sort of goal setting, bigger picture ideas, and you're also starting to become a little bit more sort of sociable during this time. You might want to say yes to more sociable things. Again, some of this depends on how introverted or extroverted you are. If you're very extroverted, you probably want to be hanging out with people all through your menstrual phase. And you're like, well, I always want to hang out with people, because but at this phase, you might want to do something new. You might want to hang out with new people. Like, you have a little bit more grace for new relationships, or like networking, or going to places that you maybe wouldn't feel as comfortable. Exercise wise, because you're slowly getting this peak in energy, is if you remember that slow increase of estrogen, this is a good time to start upping your exercise a little bit more. So this would be sort of like the bleeding part of your period should have stopped. You're sort of on anywhere between day 8 kind of onwards. You might then suddenly start to, go swimming again. Maybe you do you do intervals, maybe you run, maybe you walk, but you want to kind of get your sweat on a little bit more. This would be a good time to kind of to focus on that. And things like lifting weights, because of that peaking of estrogen, building muscle during this time is a good time to do that, because your body will be more inclined to build muscle than, say, in your menstrual phase. So you can really leverage that of like, okay, I'm going to do some Pilates, I'm going to do some weight-based stuff. Can be really useful for that. Food wise, you really want to be looking at, if you think about this as spring, so you want to be thinking about kind of fresh vegetables, spring food. This is a great time for things like fermented foods, those kind of you want slightly less heavier foods, maybe a couple more raw foods, maybe a little bit more salad, not as much comfort foods going on, and a lot more fresh. So things like more proteins and all of that sort of stuff. I mean, a lot of the stuff when it comes to eating wise, a lot of what we talk about in Nourish anyway sets you up for success with this anyway. So you don't need to you don't have to hugely change your diet. But if you think about the seasons, if you think about it in terms of the metaphorical seasons, it's quite a nice way of thinking about it, in terms of, okay, springtime type foods, slightly fresher, slightly maybe a few more raw things, kind of things a bit more energizing, and living foods are a really great time during this time, like your fermented foods, like foods that are still alive, or your microgreens, or things that are very fresh. This is a good time to start to introduce those sorts of things. And this is also meant when your kind of libido should slowly start to be going up, because your peak of your estrogen time is really when you would want your libido to be highest. And so you're kind of on that trajectory. So you should be slowly feeling a rise in your libido, slowly but surely. And that is your spring phase, or your follicular phase, depending on what it is, depending on what you want to call it. And so in terms of really leveraging your follicular phase, you want to think creativity, creative activity. You want to think fresh foods, living foods, fermented foods. Not like all the time. I'm not saying like you need to eat like salad the entire time, but just adding in a little bit of, okay, this might be a time I add in some sauerkraut or some kombucha, and maybe we'll have a salad for lunch. Whereas the week before, you might have just had like leftover chili or stew or soup or broth and maybe like some homemade brownies because it was the menstrual part of your the phase. So you'd leverage it that way. You want to start leveraging your exercise with more slightly sweatier exercises. Things like interval training is really good, and anything that builds muscle, because your body's starting to rise in estrogen, and estrogen can help with building muscle. So it really helps you to make the most of it. There is an argument and some research showing that with women trying to specifically build muscle, there's not actually, some people would say there's not a lot of point of women doing intense weight training throughout their cycle. That actually they should really focus at certain points to really leverage it, and then actually rest, because resting is also really important for building muscle. I mean, none of us are trying to be bodybuilders. I don't think in Nourish. Let me know if you are, but generally that's not what we're all trying to do. But if you're just trying to maybe do some body recomposition, or just build fitness and gain more muscle, because the more muscle you have, often the more fat you burn. So that's a generally appealing factor. You have a muscle to fat ratio, then this is a good time to start introducing that a little bit more. And hopefully you should have the energy to match that if your estrogen is starting to peak. If you're not getting that estrogen peak, you might not be getting that energy level. And then you have that kind of ovulatory phase, which is springtime. So this is, again, that time when you might put on that red dress and the red lipstick or whatever your visions of that are, and be like, woo, feeling good. There's a bit more confidence there. You there's more confidence, high libido. So you might feel a little like this would be when you'd feel like most sexiest, potentially. Great time to go out on dates with your prospective other halves. You maybe don't fancy going out on a nice romantical date or arranging a romantical meal in your menstrual phase necessarily. I wouldn't necessarily recommend that for day one of your period, because you kind of more want to be in like cozy pajamas and an old t-shirt potentially, but more in your kind of ovulatory phase, the summertime phase. That's a great time to go out on a date, get some lipstick on, dress up a little bit sexier, have some fun in the bedroom, just make the most of that sort of time, or to plan those kinds of things in, just because hopefully you will be feeling a bit more like that. We can draw on the screen. Anyway, so that was roughly because I don't think that was me. Maybe participants can draw on the screen. Anyway, doesn't really matter.
Sorry, that was me. I was trying to write a comment.
And
I just scribbled instead.
I didn't even know you could do that, Candy. So that's very educational. I could be writing notes as I go along.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just going to say, if anyone else was interested, I've managed to screenshot that on my phone, so it's
brilliant. Oh, that's good. Yes. Well, I'll put it in when I put this recording up as well. I'll link to these images, these two different images, because this image has just been taken from Alyssa's book. And there's also, she has an app as well that I'll also tell you about, that you can, I think it costs like £1.50 or something, that basically takes you through this as well, which I found really useful to do. She kind of gives you, it's a nice little wrap up. But I like this image because it just kind of reminds you of some of the basic things. I can write notes and annotate everything. Anyway, I'll not geek out on that now. Also, in terms of what to eat, you're in this summer phase, you've got that spike of estrogen, but then if you remember, you'll also see that the estrogen drops down. So actually you want to be eating foods that really support detoxification, because you want to spike in estrogen, and then you want your liver basically to take this estrogen, convert it, sort of switch it off, conjugate it with another substance, and then basically poop it out the body. That's what you want, because you want that slight decrease in estrogen in order for your progesterone to rise. So this is a really great time for things like broccoli, cauliflower, cooked kale, spinach, all these liver-loving foods, ginger, garlic, turmeric, a really nice time just to introduce kind of more liver-loving practices like lemon juice and water, maybe some hot baths, exercise. these kind of more detoxification supportive practices and foods, because you want to be excreting those hormones. And exercise wise, you're kind of at the peak of your energy, hopefully. And so that's really when you want to, and also you're feeling a lot more sociable during this time. So things like group classes, like a group MetaFit class, meeting up with a friend for a walk, those more sociable type activities. Now's a great time to make the most of those. And this is the time when you'd want to be sociable, have people over. This is a great example of this kind of summer ovulatory phase. Is sometimes you'll have a Saturday night, you're in on your own, you've got a bottle of wine, and you're just like, this is great. Saturday night, just me and Netflix, or me and Graham Norton and some wine and my pajamas, and you're like, great. And then you have other Saturday nights where you're like, I have no plans on the Saturday, I'm not doing anything, I have no life, and so everyone else is having fun on a Saturday, I'm the only one home alone doing nothing, just tidying the kitchen, and Saturday hasn't changed. The Saturday is still a Saturday, but you're suddenly like bereft that you're alone on a Saturday. Potentially it's because it's a Saturday in your ovulatory phase. And actually you really just want to be hanging out with people, socializing, sharing all those pheromones, just having fun. And potentially there's other Saturdays of maybe in your luteal phase where you're a bit more like, no, let's stay at home. So that you'll notice you're already in these different cycles, and it's just an awareness of them that can be really helpful. In terms of your actual kind of mental focus and your work in regards to this phase, this is probably time, because you're feeling most sociable, this is a great time around communication. So say you've been meaning to have a meeting with your boss that you don't really want to have, and it's like one of those awkward sort of colleague like interactions. This would be a great time to think about doing that. You might not want to do that in your kind of menstrual phase, but you might want to have those hard conversations with maybe your partner or your friend or your boss during this time. And this is also a good time you're feeling a lot more confident. So in terms of presentation, maybe you're going for, you can't always plan when you're job interviewing, but even like applying for a job, doing any sort of presentation things, putting yourself out there, trying something new. This is all a good time because you have a little bit more confidence potentially than you would do at the other phases, and your communication might feel easier and clearer during this time. Whereas sort of maybe in your menstrual phase, sort of in your winter or autumn phase, you can just be like, oh, I don't know why I feel the way, like I just feel this way. And you maybe don't have that clarity, whereas in this phase you maybe have a bit more of that kind of communicative clarity and emotional clarity, hopefully, around how you feel. So that's the ovulatory phase, that's summertime. And then finally we have winter. So to summarize, actually, summertime, you really want to make the most of being sociable, of feeling confident, of hopefully an increased libido. So romance time, bedroom time, having sex, or making a baby. If you want to make a baby, now that's the time to make a baby. Or if you don't want to make a baby, take precautions to ensure that doesn't happen. Also a good time to really focus on loving your liver, so that when you peak in estrogen, your liver can effectively detox that estrogen and detox that sudden surge of hormones, because if that sticks around, that can cause some problems. So things like your green veg, garlic, ginger, turmeric, broccoli, those kinds of foods, really great thing to have a bit more of. And still exercise wise, and you kind of still potentially want a couple more higher impact things. You might be running, you might be doing some circuits, you might just things that are going to make you a little bit sweatier than say a slow yoga class, for example, because you're still getting you still got that estrogen flowing through your blood. So you really want to leverage that with maybe muscle building activity and really sweating it out. And also that can help with detoxification and that resiliency. And then you're coming into your autumn phase, which is your luteal phase, which is post ovulation. If you remember from the other chart, you have that your estrogen kind of drops a little bit and then kind of does another little bump, but generally drops from what it was. And then you have that spike of progesterone. And so this is when you start to I suppose this image talks about turning inward a little bit more. Just maybe a good way of describing it is when you start to kind of, just as autumn's coming, you start to feel maybe less sociable, maybe like you need a little bit more time to yourself, maybe that you don't have quite as much grace for things, your tether is a little bit shorter, your patience is maybe not as long, and it's time to be a bit more home based, if that makes sense, like nesting, all of those kinds of things. Because kind of, everyone's saying to me now, the phase of pregnancy I'm in is all like, everyone's like, oh, you're nesting, which I totally am. I'm just like cooking loads of food and shoving it in my freezer like every second that I have, and doing really odd nesting activities like buying food. I think that's my main nesting activity. It's like just buying food like some sort of apocalypse is about to happen. Joe's always like, you've been to Aldi again? I'm like, yes, they had chia seeds on offer, so I may as well have 7 packets of chia seeds in the cupboard. You never know. I might. So it's just how I nest. But some of that nesting aspect in pregnancy is similar almost to the luteal phase, because it's partly to do with a rise in your progesterone levels that makes you kind of want to do. This is also in terms of your focus or like work. This is a good time to like get stuff done, take things off a to-do list, have that, that lifelong list of like life admin that you've been meaning to do forever. This is a great time to be like, oh yes, I'll phone the electricity company, get this stuff done. Oh, I need to do this. It's a good time for making lists as well. It's good to have good chunks of focus time to do things. So as opposed to being like, oh, I'll do 10 things in 1 hour, this is a good time to maybe focus on a good, say you have a longer project or an essay to write or a chunk of things or a chunk of marking to do or whatever it is. It's good to have, it's a good time to give a little bit of longer, more focused time. This is also maybe a good time for organization. So if you're feeling like this might be the time, you might have a time every month when you're just like, oh, my house is such a mess. Like, I just need to, everything. Oh, why is the Tupperware cupboard like this? I hate that the Tupperware cupboard is a disaster. And the rest of the month, the disastrous Tupperware cupboard maybe doesn't bother you. But at this time, it might really bother you, and you create a whole system to keep the lids and everything in place and keep it all in check. It's that kind of slightly more organized, ticking off to-do lists, sort of potentially more home-based nesting type stuff, whatever that looks like for you. It doesn't actually have to mean it's you in your home, but for a lot of the time that can be. And it's when you often want to maybe try and finish things, and finishing things and organizing things feels really satisfying. So this is a great time to reorganize your wardrobe, reorganize the kids' toys, maybe at work, if there's kind of project management stuff that needs doing. So I often will kind of do a lot of like calendar organization at this time in my cycle, because I just want to feel like things are ordered. It's also when I'll try to tackle my Tupperware cupboard and it never works or lasts. Someone needs to just show me a system that works in my Tupperware. But this is when faithfully every month I'll try and bring some order to it, and it'll last for about a week, and then it will all be chaos again. So exercise wise, this is when you want to focus on more restorative things. You probably find your energy is starting to drop a little bit. You might still have quite a peak of energy to begin with, but more towards basically as you're waiting on your period, you're probably not going to be feeling like, oh yeah, I want to do a circuits class. You're probably feeling more like, okay, I'd actually quite like to have a bath, maybe do some walking, and really focus on the more restorative things, stretching, and or just not exercising officially, especially towards the lead up of your period. You might actually not want to exercise at all. Sometimes doing some exercise during your actual bleeding part of your period can be really helpful, because it can stimulate increased oxygen to your uterus, which can help with things like cramping and all of that sort of stuff. I know some women, the idea of exercising when they're they're on day 1 of their period is just like, no way on earth is that happening. But for some, I actually quite like to do a bit of gentle exercise when I get my period, because I feel like it helps with some of the discomfort. But in your pre-period phase, this might be the time actually you don't exercise, and you kind of give yourself permission for that. You might just like walk and maybe focus on some mindfulness or having a bath or that kind of organizing stuff, and that's kind of okay. that, you know, that's giving yourself permission for that. Food wise, you really want to be looking at things that are good with your B vitamins, because and things like iron, because you're about to be going through a bleeding part of your cycle. So green leafy veg, some red meats, things like calcium and magnesium, so things like sardines, eating these if you like them. If you don't like them, then it might not enjoy it. And you're thinking this is more autumn, so like baked foods, roast vegetables, you know, you're starting to get into that more autumny warm thing, adding in some good foods with around your B vitamins. And then in terms of your libido would probably be slowly dropping potentially during this time. It might still be high. Every woman is different when it comes to this, but you know, you can see as you get closer towards your period, then chances are your libido might drop a little bit, and you might, you know, and that you might just need a little bit more, you know, what's the word? Support to feel sexy. It's maybe not the time when you're going to be like, woo, I'm hot stuff right before you get your period, because sometimes it can come with, you know, before your period you can feel bloated and, you know, you just want to sit in a bath. So really during this autumn phase, you want to make the most of getting some stuff done, like productivity wise, maybe organizing things, to-do lists, getting that sort of stuff done, taking chunks of time to focus on certain activities and maybe finishing them, because that completion can be really satisfying during this phase. And eating kind of more autumny type foods with some B vitamins in, things like red meats. If you are happy to eat red meat, now is a good time. Also, this is a time when you might get lots of sugar cravings, so focusing more on your kind of naturally sweet things like fruit and berries, dates, those kinds of things that are more naturally sweet, because this is the time when often women will crave a lot of sugar, and have different cravings around chocolate. And the chocolate can sometimes be around the magnesium, so making sure you're eating lots of magnesium rich foods or supplementing with magnesium during this time can be really helpful. And then focusing on like your darker chocolate, if you like that, because that's more rich in your magnesium. And feeling free with exercise to kind of maybe do little bits at the start of this phase, and then feel free to basically stop if you want to, if you're not, you know, feeling it, as it were. And so those are the four phases, and a little bit of an introduction to cycle syncing. So if you want to go into this into more depth, I highly recommend this doctor. She's written a book called Woman Code that this outlines, but she has an app that you do have to pay for, but I'm pretty sure it's like £1.50, and then that's it. Like it's not like a recurring payment, called My Flow. Is it called My Flow? And she it's called My Flow. It's on, you can get it on Android and the other one, Apple, whatever. And it's a way that you track your symptoms, and you track your period. So when you're bleeding, you put it in, and you also track your symptoms throughout the month and how you feel. And then it kind of gives you feedback of, okay, you're in an ovulatory phase, you're in this phase, and goes through kind of little tips basically of like, this is how to leverage your energy, this is how to leverage your exercise, your food, your focus in the workplace, your love life. You can even sync the app to email your partner and it sends your email partner to be like, Kezia has entered her follicular phase. This is how you can help her. And some of you might be like, that sounds awful, but I obviously signed Joe up to it. I'm not even sure I asked if he wanted to. But a lot of the time, sometimes our partners, if they're male partners, haven't a clue. You know, most women don't have a clue that this is happening with their hormones in this kind of detail that we've talked about. A lot of men don't either. They just kind of might be like, oh, she's really up for having sex one day, and then she's like, don't touch me the next day. I don't get it. What's happening? You know, and bless them. There's a real reason for that. And actually, so you can get to email our partners. And I looked at the emails that got sent to Joe, and actually they're all there's nothing like patronizing or weird about them. And sometimes the suggestions that they give to your partner are things like, maybe help around the house a little bit more this week. So I once came home and was like, Joe, I think you've done some DIY task or fixed something that's been meaning to be fixed, you know, like for ages, that it wasn't essential. It was like, oh, well, an email said I should help you out this week. And I was like, I love these emails. These are great. So you obviously don't have to do that. You can choose to do that, but it's a great app to use just in terms of getting you into this way of thinking. And then probably after a couple of months, probably 4 to 5 months of doing this, and you'll create your own language around it, if that makes sense. You'll realize that actually for you, maybe your peak in energy is like 20 days after your bleeding part of your cycle. Or maybe for you, when you actually, on your menstrual phase, when you're bleeding, you actually don't want to do gentle yoga, or you don't want to do any exercise, but you really like to go for it just before your period. And you can it's basically a really helpful way of just helping you to start to join the dots of, okay, how am I feeling? How am I performing? What do I need? What do I want? And how is that linked to what's going on in my biochemistry? And therefore, what can I give myself permission to not do, so that I'm not beating myself up and driving myself into the ground? And also, what can I really leverage? Because now's a really, what are the activities that are that at this point in my month I should really make the most of and will really enjoy doing as well. And so you can really dive deep into this in terms of how you almost can schedule out your time. So what this has meant for me is, I mentioned before that I used to get really sad and feel like I was a total loner. So what I started to do was, after a couple of months where I was noticing these patterns, I started to just put things in my own diary as like reminders to myself. So during my ovulatory phase, I did want to be more sociable, or I did want to have people around for a games night, or I did want to go out for cocktails or whatever. So I'd start to put reminders into my calendar of like, book in to see your friends next week. Because otherwise that time would come around and I'd be like, oh, I'm so alone in the world. And actually all I needed was a reminder to go and book in to see someone. Same with when I was in my luteal phase, when I'd feel a little bit wobblier, I would have put in a couple of days. It would always be at least a 2-day period when I just feel really sad, just feel like the world is this terrible place and it's just getting worse, going from bad to worse, and it's just terrible. I just spiral down into just the sadness of the state of life. And so once I started to notice that this was a regular recurring thing, I started to put that in my diary of, I think I put it in as feeling wobbly at a set time, because once my periods started to become a bit more regular, I knew roughly, like, I would just put into my calendar feeling a little bit wobbly during this time, so that when I did wake up and feel like the world was ending and that it was just a depressing place to live in, I could look at my phone and be like, oh yeah, okay, today and tomorrow I am going to be feeling a little bit wobblier. I'm going to be a little bit kinder to myself. It's how I feel, but it's not necessarily reality, which is quite a nice distinction to make sometimes. So that is a little bit around cycle syncing. So in terms of, feel free if you have any questions. I'll stop sharing this. I'll put these images up in, when the recording goes up, I will link to these images, and I'll link to the to Alyssa Vitti, the lady who kind of brought together all these. She's basically just brought together lots of information and structured it in a really nice way based on research and her experience, which is really useful. I'll link to some of her stuff and the app as well, although you can just search for My Flow, I think, in like app stores. But if you have any questions, and do feel free to let me know. I know I've collected a few from the Facebook group that I'll go through now, but feel free to either type it out or unmute yourself and ask your questions. Oh, hello.
Kezia, can I ask?
Yes.
Like the first 2 days, I absolutely feel drunk.
Okay.
The first 2 days of my bleeding, I can't string sentences together. I just feel drunk and dizzy, and it's just not nice. So what is going on? What's that about?
It could be, if you're feeling drunk, that if I ever have clients that have that sort of drunk type vibe, it's often to do with liver clearance.
Okay.
Which would make sense if you're coming into your bleeding part and you've maybe have had your peaks of estrogen and you maybe have had a peak of progesterone, But then if your liver's quite sluggish at detoxing that, then that's when there may be that kind of a liver clearance issue, or that feeling of drunkenness, because that's often where it can, where feeling drunk can be partly coming from, is because your liver's quite like overworked, if that makes sense, or there's a lot going on there. So that would be my initial thoughts, is actually your body's maybe struggling with the detoxification of those hormones after those two big peaks of different hormones, and then it's kind of left with all these pieces, not pieces, it's left with all the hormones, if that makes sense. That would be my initial thought. So it might be that in that kind of final autumn stage, that supporting detoxification for you is really important to really help.
Would that be like baths and like green veggies and exercise and stuff like that?
Yeah, things like Epsom salt baths would be great. You could also put some like bentonite clay in there as well. That can help with detoxing, or some bicarb of soda or vitamin C powder into your baths, or just sweating whilst relaxed is really, really helpful for liver detoxification. Which is why exercise doesn't always work, because you're often sweating, but you're kind of like feeling the burn. And then things like, as you say, your green kind of leafy veg, things like garlic and turmeric can be really helpful. It might also be like, if you were ever gonna like drink green juice, you might not drink it all the time, but that phase might be a useful time to do like even like ginger shots, or if you have a juicer or into that, things like your lemon water. And
I have that, my lemon water.
Yay! And even it might even be that during that specific phase, or even from like ovulation onwards, or things like dry skin brushing. That's another good one. Okay. Or it might even be that sort of supplementation wise, you look at more kind of liver supporting supplementation, even just for that phase. Or it might, to be fair, it might be helpful to do that throughout. You can get certain kind of herbal blends that would be things like milk thistle, dandelion, nettle, or your detoxing teas are really helpful as well, actually, during that phase. Or you can either get a herbalist to make you up a nice little kind of concoction to you, or you can buy some as well but it's mainly like milk thistle, dandelion, nettle. Those would be the main things you would that help support your detox pathways in your liver. Because that's probably what I think. There's probably a couple of things going on, but I think your liver might be your first port of call.
That's great. Thank you
for that. Just sort of give our livers a little bit of TLC.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Very welcome. The other thing to mention is, someone asked this, what if your periods are irregular, or you have no periods? You can still sort of, if your periods are irregular, you can still follow this same cycle. I'd probably recommend that you track it. It's really helpful to track your periods, even if they're not regular, just so you can roughly know where it is. And if, say, you're kind of post-menopausal, or your periods have stopped, but you still like this idea of more cyclical living, you can actually utilize kind of the cycle of the moon. Some women like to do that, and some women find that their period cycle, their menstrual cycle, does actually sync with the moon cycle because of just how it works. I know that sounds really like weird, but it's actually the moon is constantly on a cycle, so you can then start to follow that, and it's quite a nice. I don't know loads about it, and it's something I actually want to learn more about in the coming months, because I think it's just another nice example of this kind of cyclical living that we actually are kind of ruled by, and the seas are ruled by, and those kind of things. And it's just another layer of this cycle that we live in. So if you are kind of post-menopausal, or you don't have a period at all for any reason, but you like the idea of it, you can actually still kind of leverage these same principles, but instead of necessarily tracking when you're bleeding or not bleeding, you would track the different phases of the moon. And you can go into like super weird spiritual stuff with it. I think some people probably do, but you can also not as well. If you don't want to, you can just kind of look at it from more of a, this is actually what's happening in the moon and in light and spectrum of light and all of that kind of thing. And you can kind of work on a more, it's not as biochemically based, it's more symbolically based, but it's still really nice in terms of that same sort of metaphor of going through. There was questions of foods that are good to stave off the munchies and feeling low. So normally most of the time, this kind of munchy sort of food cravings is happening either in your luteal phase, so just before your period, or when you have got your kind of in the bleeding part of your cycle. That's often when you would get those kind of cravings. So a lot of that can be to do with either your insulin management, so making sure you're eating enough. I know I say that, I know I say that a lot, but making sure you keep your blood sugar balanced is really, really important. And so again, making sure you're having proper meals can be really helpful. During that time, it's not a time to like skip breakfast, skip lunch. It's not a great time to do that. Also thinking about magnesium, white Epsom salt baths can be helpful. Magnesium oil spray for your skin, or magnesium body butter. If your magnesium is really quite low, then your energy will also be low, but you'll also probably be craving magnesium rich food, and magnesium rich food is things like chocolate often. And then if you're craving magnesium and your blood sugars are regulated, you're probably going to want to be craving like dairy milk chocolate, so you can get a sugar and a tiny bit of magnesium through that. There's not a lot of magnesium in dairy milk, but if you go with a dark chocolate, then you would be getting, it's one of the best sources of food-based magnesium that you can have. But Epsom salt baths would be really useful for that. And in terms of feeling low, like emotionally, some of that is with, depending on how low you go, if that makes sense, and how extreme you feel like your symptoms are, then it might be with looking at, okay, where's my progesterone levels at? Am I actually reaching that peak? Am I hitting that peak at all? Or is my progesterone a little bit lower? And if you feel like your progesterone is quite low, vitamin C is a really helpful hormone for helping cultivate progesterone. It's also very non-toxic, non-invasive. You can use things like progesterone creams and kind of supplementary hormones, but that's a whole other ball game that you don't really want to mess with unless you're very sure of what's going on with your hormones, if that makes sense. I've known lots of women to sort of willy-nilly taking progesterone creams or whatever, and then it's not always been that helpful. But vitamin C, really gentle, non-toxic, also helps your immune system, also helps your metabolism. For those of you that have been around for a while, you also know that I love vitamin C, but it does help to contribute, especially in your luteal phase, at that increase of progesterone. Just one of its other many great benefits that vitamin C has, and that can be just your ascorbic acid vitamin C, or like food-based vitamin C from things like berries and vegetables and fruits and those kinds of things. I think Sue was asking why, it was Candy, was it? Someone asked why their digestion goes really weird. It was Sarah, that was it. Basically why her digestion goes off, and why maybe people would get like bits of diarrhea or weird bowels, basically either just before their period or just after their period. And that's often due to you get an increase of your prostaglandins, and that increases in order to help your uterus to contract slightly in order to shed that kind of uteral lining. But during that, it can also affect your bowels as well. So if you imagine it's helping the contraction, the muscles around your uterus contract, it can sometimes help the muscles around your bowel to contract as well, which can lead to kind of looser stools, or that feeling of bloatedness, or just a bit of a disruption going on there, kind of digestive wise, because you suddenly got your muscles around digestion are suddenly getting signaled to do lots of stuff. So getting a bit of diarrhea before your period or when you're on your period is relatively normal. It shouldn't last very long, and it shouldn't necessarily be like horrendous. I've been to India, sort of sat on the toilet for probably an overshare about my experience in India, but that is, and Morocco, also similar experience in Morocco. But there will be a potential slight looseness. That's very normal. in terms of digestive upset, that can be to do with mainly your prostaglandins, but also that spike of progesterone. If you are getting that spike of progesterone, that can also affect your digestion, just because your digestive system is very similar to your brain in how rich it is of nerves, if that makes sense. And so progesterone is really important for your brain, but it does have a bit of a sidekick effect on your digestion, because there's so much kind of nerve activity within your gut itself. Because when you're an embryo, your brain and your gut come from the same type of cell, so which is why your gut is often called your second brain, because they're very similar in their early life and where they came from. Someone else was asking, is it normal to get really hot at night? Yes, it is, because your temperature does spike during ovulation, so which is why sometimes you can just get like really roasting, and because your temperature can go up by potentially like a degree, 2 degrees, maybe not 2 degrees, maybe about a degree. If you were to track your temperatures, which is quite a good thing to do if you are looking for more like natural contraceptive, or if you're looking to get pregnant, or if you're just checking in with your thyroid. To be fair, it's quite useful to just track your temperature in the morning, which is basically where you take your temperature. As soon as you wake up, you shove a thermometer in your mouth and you track your temperature before you pee, before you get up, before you move, before you drink water, and that's called your basal temperature. And if you do that for a month, you will see that your temperature does spike, and that's normally around ovulation. And it's also a helpful thing to do if you're looking to avoid getting pregnant, or if you're looking to get pregnant, because it's that spike that you want to avoid having unprotected sex with. But it's also a really great way to check in with your thyroid, because it's really worth saying, if you are experiencing lots of unpleasant symptoms with your period, lots of issues with your mood, your energy, your skin, maybe your period is incredibly painful, incredibly heavy, feels slightly debilitating, doesn't feel like a superpower at all, then it's really worth checking in with things like your thyroid and your adrenals, because they will really affect your hormonal cycle, as well as your liver. Like we were just talking about, your liver plays a really, really important role in keeping this very kind of distinct kind of ebbs and flows of hormones, of keeping that kind of more clean cut, because the body is very particular. It really wants an excess of estrogen at certain points, but if you have an excess of estrogen at other points, the body's like, I don't like that. I don't like that at all. It's only supposed to be high at this point, and now it's high at this point. This isn't right. It's very particular. The body, a bit like Goldilocks, very fussy. It only wants progesterone to be peaked at a certain time, not at any other time. And so that's when the liver really comes in, because making sure we have good liver clearance, that our detox pathways are really good, robust, and resilient, that will help us to have spikes of hormones when we need spikes, and drops of hormones when we need drops in those hormonal levels as well. Someone else was asking about, why does my skin break out just before my period? That can be to do with your liver in terms of regulating your hormones, but it's primarily around your progesterone levels. So often just before the bleeding part of your cycle, your progesterone really drops, and so that can sometimes cause issues that can cause that skin breaking out happening as well. So it really is, your skin is often a lot to do with your liver and your hormones and your gut as well. So really supporting to help avoid those kind of skin breaking out, really supporting your liver, and also doing a bit of gut support, so that with those fermented foods can really help with that during that time. And also Amy from Skin Therapy, she has some great blog articles and different things around skin, kind of specifically acne, around your hormone and your cycles, because it really affects the different hormone levels, affects how much serum your kind of skin cells will produce, and so regulating those is really, really important. But everyone has slightly different severities of that. Not everyone, I don't get acne when my skin during fluctuations in my period. So there's also some other factors at play as well. And actually Amy's going to be coming on for doing some live Q&A. I think it's in November. So I know that's maybe a really long way off, but she's great when it comes to all things skincare. And we've got a masterclass with her coming up by probably must be in November. I think that's what is planned. And I'm just looking through the questions. Yes, I think that is everything. Oh, and it's 9 o'clock. So we should all go to bed, says the pregnant lady. You're like, no, Kezia, I'm not going to go to bed for like another like hour and a half. But I mean, to be fair, even before I got pregnant, I like to be in bed by about 9:30, 10 o'clock. So not much has changed. But if you have any other questions, feel free to let me know in the Facebook group. I'll put this up and a couple of the resources in the members area. Otherwise, thank you for joining me. I hope that has made sense and been helpful. And I have to say, it's been one of the, I've been aware of and tracking my periods and that kind of thing for years. But this whole aspect of cycle syncing's only been something I've really been doing in the last probably 2 years prior to getting pregnant. And it's actually been a really empowering process and really helped me, to be kinder, show a bit more self-care to myself, but also, and give myself a bit more permission, but also to really make change how I think about my period. And instead of thinking about it as this awful cursed thing that makes me feel crap, actually being like, okay, this is actually a gift. This is something that can be utilized really well, and it can be really powerful when it's like any superpower. It's like you have to know how to use it. There's always some wise person saying that in a Marvel film. It's like with great power comes great responsibility. So it's maybe not quite that level, but a similar kind of vibe. And it can really shift your relationship and how you relate with your cycle, with your period, with your body. And that can be really, really powerful actually in terms of affecting then the other aspects of your health. So I hope this has been really helpful. If you have any questions, let me know. If you start using the app and you start cycle syncing, then let me know in the group. We can all say the different, I'm in autumn, I'm in spring, I'm in whatever it is. Then and then that would be really, really helpful. Otherwise, thank you for joining me. And I will see you in our awesome group. Sending you lots of love, guys.